Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, we're talking to Hyperledger. Hyperledger is an industry-wide open-source initiative to advance blockchain technology governed by the Linux Foundation. They're really a project of projects. It was really great talking to him. It was a great interview. But before we get to that interview, I've got a quick message. Hello, if you like this episode and you want to hear more like it, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll get every single episode. The Talking Cryptocurrency podcast is available on all podcast clients. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if podcasts aren't your thing, I publish video versions of these interviews on YouTube and DTube, so you can subscribe there too. All the links to all that stuff is going to be in the show notes. So please, if you want to hear more of this show, subscribe. Hello, and on today's episode, I'm here with Marta Piekarsk. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you.
Did I totally mess up that name?
It's okay. It's Polish, and to be honest, my mother kept her maiden name, which is Świerczyńska, and that's even worse. She's an international journalist, so we are used to it in Poland.
Well, thank you for being so nice about it. So, could you tell me a little about the problems that Hyperledger is trying to solve?
Oh, wow, that's a very loaded question. We are trying to improve the world, I guess. We are hosted by the Linux Foundation, and maybe that will give some background. Linux Foundation for the last 16 years has provided an unparalleled support for open source community through the financial and intellectual resources, providing the governance, IT infrastructure, services, events, and trainings. And we are really dedicated at Linux Foundation to building sustainable ecosystem around open source projects. We are working with the global community of technologists to solve the world's hardest problems. And we use open source. Everything that is developed in Linux Foundation is open source. And we hope that we're kind of creating the largest shared technology investment. Now, from that, Linux Foundation hosts currently about 50 projects in every major industry. And about 2 years ago, Hyperledger was started. Hyperledger was started as a global cross-industry consortium of communities to advance business blockchain technologies. So what Hyperledger does is we incubate and promote enterprise-grade open source business blockchain technologies. And these include distributed ledgers, smart contract engines, client libraries, graphical interfaces, and utility libraries. And we are basically providing the underlying open source software on top of which anyone can set up their apps to meet their business needs. So we are providing an enabler, an enhancer for the enterprises to build on top of it. We in Hyperledger, similarly to Linux Foundation, bring enterprises together and the open source community together to develop the code. So we don't have developers on staff. We have people who can code, but they don't really contribute any code to the project. It is all about the open source community that does that.
Okay, so it's really like a project of projects.
Yes, exactly. Very well put. Or some people say that we are a bit like a marketplace that brings everyone together and kind of creates ecosystem.
Now, do these projects use the same software license, or do you use different kinds of software licenses?
We always use Apache license. Every project that comes to Hyperledger or to Linux Foundation, for that matter, needs to be developed under Apache license.
And do you have any position about software patents? Do you have those?
No, we don't hold software patents. We believe in open source.
It's a bit of a touchy subject in the blockchain community.
It is, isn't it? But, I think that we need to work together and collaborate together. And I'm sure that there are many paths to do that.
And I want to bring up one thing that I think there's some kinds of confusion about. There is no Hyperledger coin, is that right?
Oh, yes, we would be very rich if we did that. No, we do not plan to do ICO. We are very grateful for our members paying the membership fee. We are non-for-profit as well, right? So it would be kind of complicated. There are many companies and enterprises that use Hyperledger frameworks, and on top of that build some kind of coins, tokens, mostly utility tokens though. We don't see many of just typical currency tokens. But our frameworks do not kind of by default do that. We have a framework that is called Hyperledger Borrow that uses the Ethereum virtual machine. And it kind of runs on top of, it can run on top of Hyperledger Fabric or Hyperledger Sawtooth to provide these Ethereum smart contracts. But the approach there was to look at what is enterprise grade or interesting for enterprises in the Ethereum community, and how can we bring that under open source Apache license. And what was left when we looked at it was the Ethereum virtual machine and the smart contract mechanism, Solidity smart contracts, and that was basically it.
And so how many projects are under the umbrella of Hyperledger right now?
Currently, we have 10 different projects. It is 5 frameworks: Hyperledger Sawtooth, Hyperledger Fabric, Hyperledger Indy, Hyperledger Borrow, and Hyperledger Iroha. And then we have 5 different tools. These tools include Hyperledger Caliper, Hyperledger Explorer, Hyperledger Composer, Hyperledger Cello, and Hyperledger Quilt.
Okay. And of those, what do you think is the most popular one?
Well, that really depends how you look at it. There are definitely the most mature one, kind of the grandfather of Hyperledger projects, is Hyperledger Fabric. But today we see a lot of adoption of Hyperledger Sawtooth, and there's a very growing community. Hyperledger Borrow is one that the Ethereum community knows very well, and we closely collaborate. We don't see ourselves competitive to any other consortium or any other body out there. We really want to work with everyone. Hyperledger Indy is becoming extremely popular with the rise of GDPR, because Hyperledger Indy focuses on the identity. So managing identities of people and things, and enabling things like KYC in banking industry, know your client process, or in IoT, identifying your devices using distributed identifiers for that. And there has recently been a hearing at European Commission, and European Commission has announced that Hyperledger Indy is the only GDPR compliant blockchain technology out there, not only within Hyperledger but across all platforms.
So you have some unique challenges in this project because associated with it. Is that right?
Yes. I don't think these are challenges. I would see them as opportunities. We've started with 30 different enterprises that kind of asked to create Hyperledger as a response to everything that was happening around Bitcoin and blockchain around the world. So about 2 years ago, we really kind of looked around and said, well, we are doing all of those interesting things in a Linux Foundation. It's time to move into the blockchain space, but specifically blockchain, not Bitcoin, because we want to enable enterprises and kind of give them the foundations to build something on top of it. It's very hard. Bitcoin is a tool rather than as a framework that can be used for different purposes. And so we are growing extremely fast. Today we are, after 2 years, we are 250 members. That includes enterprises, universities, some governments as well. And we kind of have to balance the governance there, but the community is great at it, and we don't see any struggles. It's more the openness of collaboration and willingness to contribute.
Great strength of open source software, and especially with organizations like Hyperledger, where you have all these groups that are all collaborating together because they all have the same goals.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of, I think, the biggest advantages of open source. And when people ask me why should enterprises look at open source, I say because you and your in-house will have 1/250th of the knowledge and power and experience as well, cultural, practical, and so on, than the 250 members all combined together. And everyone puts something in, and then they all gain something out of it. I like to give a parallel to kind of gathering and making, say, a cookie. We all come up with a good recipe for a cookie. We work together to make that recipe the best possible, and everyone brings something, right? You bring milk, I bring flour, someone brings chocolate chips, and we make that same cookie, a batch of same cookies. And then everyone takes a single cookie home and decorates it on their own as they wish. And some will make, crumble it and make an apple pie out of it. Someone will decorate it in, say, Christmas trees, because Christmas is coming up. And someone will keep it plain. And maybe, minimalist version is the most trendy one, and they will sell the most of their plain cookies. But we all shared the knowledge and we all shared the experience, and we know that the outcome is the best possible.
So what have been some of the challenges of this kind of meta project?
Well, this, first of all, it's the collaboration part. Of course, bringing players and making them comfortable to collaborate and to share knowledge is very unique and very hard to do. So we don't we sometimes see challenges there, to kind of convince people to contribute back, not only take the code, but also to contribute it back to the community. We also see challenges with general level of comfort with blockchain. Funny enough, because it's such a buzzword, we are moving from the hype where everyone wanted to use blockchain to the point where everyone's kind of hesitant to even investigate it because it's all about hype and there's no real thing behind it, which is not true. We see a lot of very good projects and deployments, production versions of our software.
And so what are some of the plans for the future for Hyperledger?
Growth, probably, and building a stronger community, engaging more our developers to contribute the code, contribute to the working groups. We have 10 different working groups, both very technical and very some more industry-oriented, high-level discussion forums in healthcare and in trade finance, in public sector. So gathering people together to work and share the knowledge. Making them comfortable with that, and then making it easier to contribute code back and learning what people do. We have so many hidden gems out there of people using Hyperledger software, but we are not aware of it. So I always say that the best thing you can do is send me an email and tell me about the latest Hyperledger frame project that you've heard about or built on top of. And then, of course, more projects probably will come. We are open to anyone submitting their code proposition and their framework to our community. And if the community wants to take it up and foster the development, then we will be very supportive of it.
Do you know of any other foundations like the Linux Foundation that is doing a similar kind of project?
Well, there are several collaborations and kind of forums. R3 is a staple one. It's a member of They are a member of Hyperledger, but they are more finance and insurance oriented gathering of also more blockchain as a service, I would say, than anything else. There is no foundation or project of projects like Linux Foundation that develops enterprise grade and open source solutions. That's pretty unique to us.
Yeah, I thought so, because I tried looking around and it seems like you folks are the only ones really doing that. And it's hard to understate how much of a benefit using that off the shelf open source software is, how much work it saves. I see a lot of people in the industry really kind of duplicating efforts over and over again.
Yes, that is true, and this is, I hope, the future that we will. I don't think there will be one blockchain to rule them all. We definitely in Hyperledger believe that there is a space for everyone, be it open source, closed source, specific to a certain application, or very global. But I hope my hope is that we will start reusing what others are doing. This is what we are trying to encourage in the community as well, because really without that collaboration we won't be in a truly blockchain enabled world. Blockchain is about peer-to-peer network, and you need peers on that network, and they sometimes are your competitors, but that's what the blockchain brings to the table, that trust in technology and not trust in people with whom you're dealing with.
Yeah, I don't think people really realize how vital open source has been to the development of blockchain technology.
Yes, I don't think we would. Open source brings the ability to develop and redevelop and improve on top of other solutions, rather than sticking to your own and creating from one part to the other to the other. So it's really vital that that spirit of open sourceness works. If you think of any proprietary game that you played, one day one developer just decides that they want to do something else, and then, oh well, you can't play that game anymore because it's not updated. In open source this doesn't happen, because there are millions of other people, or at least two, that like the same game as you do, and they will take up the burden of developing it.
Well, Hyperledger is a really interesting project. It's very, very large. We've barely hit the tip of the iceberg. Was there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
I think you didn't ask me anything about education and how people can learn more about Hyperledger, given how big it is and complicated.
Yeah, so how can we learn more about Hyperledger?
We have created two courses that are free, open source, online courses on the edX platform. One of them is called Blockchain for Business, Introduction to Hyperledger Technologies. And this one is aiming to provide really a very broad overview of Hyperledger and permission blockchains as well. So it is everything from what is permission blockchain, what are the different players in the field, diving deeper into particular frameworks and how do they differ one from the other, what is their approach to smart contracts, to consensus mechanism, and so on. And then actually even the last part is helps you implement use case both in Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Sawtooth to get your hands dirty. So it's free, it's open source, it's really worth doing. And the other one is called business blockchain technologies, and this course is aimed more on a CEO, CTO level people who would like to really get a grasp of what is the blockchain technology in general. So it talks a bit about hash functions, or what is a smart contract, but on a very high level, so that you can hold a very informed discussion afterwards, rather than just people going over your head. We also have universities program, so we develop a lot of content for universities. We have top tier universities joining us, Hyperledger associate members. Associate membership is free of charge for non-for-profits and universities and governments. And there we really see very interesting collaboration research happening. So I would love people to email me their research ideas, or sign up and say, I'm a researcher and I would love to do more research on Hyperledger, but I don't know what it is. So we have a training and education working group. We have a universities devoted webpage that talks more about that. So these are some of the ways in which Hyperledger kind of supports the education.
That's really awesome. Wow. Yeah, it seems like it's going to be just a juggernaut. I mean, it's big right now, but I just feel like it's going to be growing more and more and really kind of be, I don't want to say a dominating force, but like a very influential force, maybe.
That's our hope. We definitely don't need or want to dominate, but we absolutely would
Yeah, yeah.
like to have an impact and change the way that we think about technology, make everyone comfortable with it, and show that this whole blockchain thing, even if it's early days, and it is very early days, is real and is happening. We have seen the production deployments of wonderful collaborations. I mean, staple ones are WeTrade and Trade Finance, a collaboration of seven or now even more than seven very competitive banks that work together to provide a better experience for customers that deal with them. We see applications in healthcare where healthcare records can be shared across different participants on the network in a way that is safe and private. Same with insurance claims or interstate licensing, making sure that certification goes through. These all, and food supply chain is also very big, tracking the provenance of food and the quality of food on a blockchain. In China today, there are all bananas and rice and pork, all three being tracked through Hyperledger Fabric blockchain. We are trying really hard to not only apply our technology and encourage people to apply our technology for purely, financial use cases or the very money-driven use cases. We also try to encourage enterprises and open source community to use that technology where it can help other people, that can help environment. So looking at sustainability, looking at or provenance of goods that might be causing some trouble, like diamonds. So making sure that they don't come from the war zones. Providing digital identity. We closely collaborate with ID 2020, which is a United Nations program for giving identity to 1.3 billion people in the world, and really trying to solve that problem of how can we help everyone get identity that is not dependent on the governments or not solely dependent on the governments if they don't feel comfortable with having that.
Yeah, I suppose one nice thing about having a foundation doing it is that the profit motive doesn't have to be necessarily there. There needs to be a need and a motivation.
Yes, of course, we are dependent on our members, and if people will not join Hyperledger, we will not be able to the kind of grow and develop. But a lot of what we do is not driven by any kind of profit. We want to make sure that others profit, and we want to tell the story of our members. That's what Hyperledger membership is being able to announce to the world what you do through the speaker of the bigger community.
Well, that's really great. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Marta, for coming on the show. It was great talking to you. It's so fun talking to people who share a passion for open source software. If you want to learn more about Hyperledger, check the show notes. All those links are going to be in there. You've been listening to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. My name is Jason Rigden, and I've been your host. Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked it, would you please consider giving us a rating and review on iTunes? I look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.